This is the Second Studio, hosted by the Architecture and Design Office fame. My name is David Lee, and with me is Marina Bordero-Ney. The two of us are architects, partners at the office, and of course, hosts of the show. And today, our guest is Thomas Rowntree.
Thomas is an architectural designer and content creator on a mission to inspire the next crop of architects.
Yeah, with Thomas, we talk about, as you can imagine, how we got into architecture and practicing architecture, and then him engaging architects in the world of social media and the power of social media and where he sees that it could be going. And we also talk about his book, Architectural Influence, which you guys might have heard of. And there will be a link of it in the episode notes, so make sure to click on that, check it out. It's a worthwhile read, and I think he is part of a group and a generation of people who is, I see you just said it in the bio, but he's really trying to push forward the profession by leveraging social media in a much more productive manner than it has been. Mm-hmm. Interesting conversation. Sponsors.
This episode of The Second Studio is brought to you by BQE Core, the all-in-one firm management software built for architects. Designed by architects for architects, Core helps you track time effortlessly, manage projects seamlessly, and get paid faster so you can focus on design, not spreadsheets. With powerful automation and real-time insights, it's everything you need to run a smarter, more profitable firm. See how BQE Core can transform your practice by clicking the link in our show notes. Available with Revit version 2023.1 onward, Autodesk Insight is a next-generation carbon analysis tool that can help you make the leap to low-carbon design. With only a few clicks, Insight lets you analyze, understand, and track the embodied and operational carbon impact of your design choices. You can then visualize opportunities for energy efficiency and carbon mitigation with its flexible dashboards, helping you make more sustainable and informed decisions. Check out the Insight link in our show notes to find out more.
This is The Second Studio with myself, Marina, and our guest, Thomas. Here we go.
I'm from England. I grew up in the UK and a city called Nottingham, which is, I guess you'd call it Midlands in the UK, north of London. People who know London would probably be better known as north of London. And so I grew up there. I was born there. I've been there most of my life, only until when I went to university, when I moved out. And obviously I moved across to Birmingham for a short period of time to do my undergraduate studies. And then I moved down to London to do my master's degree, and where I've been practicing for the past few years. So I guess to kind of dive into the conversation of how I got into architecture, it's an interesting one because I think it's always the cliche. It's always Lego, and I'm not going to go fully into that because I think there's more to it than that. And I think from my experience, it was always growing up and being young. I was quite creative. I was quite practical. I wanted to build things, I wanted to create things, I wanted to visualize things. And as part of that journey, obviously Lego just became one of those things where you can see an image on a box of what this building or a car or a crane or whatever it might be. And then you get given all of these little bags and an instruction manual to build something from the ground up. And I think for me, from an early stage, although I probably didn't realize it at the time, what I really was passionate about was seeing that final thing and then seeing the little pieces and components in the instruction manual and taking it on that journey from taking it from those small pieces into that final image. And so for me, it's become more about the process and the journey that you go through within architecture. And so from those early stages of Lego and being quite practical and creative, I think someone kind of planted the seed in my head that I could become an architect, and that it could become a career path that I could pursue, which is obviously the kind of the general consensus of when you're young and you do Lego and all of these things. People see you, okay, architecture, good career, stable career, and it kind of lines up with your kind of skill set at that age and your kind of mentality. So from an early age, that was kind of my first introduction to architecture. I didn't have anyone in my family who was an architect, or I didn't really know much of architecture, which was quite interesting because then when I went into university, I realized that a lot of people that started studying architecture knew a lot about architecture. They had parents who were architects, they had relatives that were architects, and they'd given them work experience or whatever it might have been. For me, it was very much, I didn't know much about it. That said, my stepdad was a landscape designer. So what he did do is he would design gardens. So he would design them and build them. So he'd take it from the process, from the idea, all the way through to the very end to building the garden himself. And so obviously during summers when I was young and when I needed to build up some money and I needed to make some money between kind of term times, I worked with him. So I worked with him over summers. I helped him build patios, helped him build walls, helped him lay lawns. And I also occasionally would watch him draw and create these kind of really beautiful landscape design drawings. And I was always intrigued with how he would use different pens and different colors and how he would color in the floor plan and how he would add the detail and to show the scale and all of these things that at the time I just thought was interesting and intriguing, which now when I reflect back, I realized that probably was a bit of an influence to me and a bit of a kind of seed planting moment in my head. So then I decided to go for architecture. At school, I studied maths, art and graphics, and I was generally good at art and graphics because I was quite a creative person. And I realized pretty early on that they were the kind of suitable skill set. That was the suitable skill set or the common skill set to have to go into architecture, to be good at art, to be able to design and be creative. And so that was my kind of route into architecture. It wasn't necessarily the kind of conventional route. It was something where it was a process of me learning probably that I was creative and that I was practical, and then realizing that the skill set that I had lined up with a career in architecture. And so that's kind of what took me down that road. And maybe along the way I was a bit ignorant, because I think one of the interesting things is that when I landed at architecture school and when I made my first day at architecture school, I remember everyone being so passionate about buildings and architects, and they knew everything about lots of different people, and they'd visited places, and they'd traveled to Valencia or wherever it might be to see Calatrava's work or whatever it might be. Whereas when I got there, yes, I'd been on holiday and I've went away and traveled with my family, but architecture was never the focus. We never went there to see the buildings. We never went there to see the architecture. It was just a holiday. And so
yeah, like normal people.
so then when I got there, it was a case of people asking me, "Oh, who's your favorite architect?" or "Where have you visited?" and "Where's your interest in architecture?" And to be honest, I didn't really know. I was kind of just thrown in the deep end. I just went for it because I didn't have that background. And the reason why I mentioned ignorance is because I actually think it benefited me, because going into architecture with no preconceived ideas and no idea of what I was actually going into, and I could go into it fully open-minded and think with a kind of clean slate, with no one telling me this is how it normally works in practice, this is how we design buildings. I went into it fully clean and not really knowing what I was going into. And so in many ways it benefited me, and it made me want to be curious about the profession and curious about architecture and what it even is. And so I still ask that question to this day. What is architecture? what is the role of the architect? What are we doing here? And that's a real kind of purpose to the work that I do, is that I'm trying to still question that, and I'm still trying to encourage people to question that. And so that's my kind of journey in, and yeah.
That's beautifully said. And I have a couple questions with it. The last point you brought up, though, I personally agree with very strongly. And everyone has their own track and their own, mindset. So it definitely is a, person-to-person situation. But I do think stepping into, in this case, architecture school without any preconceived notions of what architecture is probably the best way to go about it. And there's it's sort of parallel like to when you're a lot younger and you're ignorant, you go and take risks. I feel like it's sort of the same wavelength of thinking and behavior, right? Yeah. If you don't have any preconceived ideas about something, you're just much more flexible in your brain to absorb alternatives that you're not aware of. My to play sort of devil's advocate in the question is, in that first year of architecture school, maybe the first few years, did you ever feel like you were behind and you were nervous because you didn't have that, clearly quotable knowledge that classmates had, or the skill set of knowing how to draw like a floor plan, or, whatever other things that people come to the table with when they're first years?
Yeah, of course you feel, I think when someone comes in with no idea compared to someone who very much knows what a floor plan is, knows what an orthographic drawing is, knows how to draw a door swing or how to scale a drawing. That instantly puts you on the back foot because you have to go through a process of learning the things and the basics and the fundamentals of architecture, which someone else might already know. Now, I don't necessarily feel like it held me back. I think it just, obviously, probably the first few weeks or months was a process of me trying to understand, okay, what does it mean for a drawing to be scaled 1 to 5 or 1 to 100? What does that even mean? Or how do you even do that? And what are the multiples to get there? And so those kind of things you learn as you go along. But one thing that I did have some kind of experience in is that when I went and did my A levels, the UK system, you do A levels.
So what are A levels?
The UK system is almost, it's kind of like your high school. It's the final grades you get before you go to university. And so you get to choose a variety of subjects. You get to choose 3 or 4 subjects, mine being maths, graphics, and art. And so what I did was, because I knew I was going to go into architecture, I did a project through my graphics course where I actually designed a leisure centre. And now it was really kind of standard stuff. It was pretty basic, but it taught me to, okay, so you need some MDF, you need to laser cut it, you need to glue it together, you need to paint something, cool. You could print this out and then you could stick it on so you get a bit of kind of material and a finish. And so I had an idea of how things kind of come together and what the process would be to build a model, for example. And so although the kind of general terminology and the general understanding of what architecture drawing is and the different types of drawings, I still had knowledge of how to build and how to be practical, which put me in a better position than other people, I guess. And so that didn't, I don't feel like it necessarily held me back. And I think it's very different today, now that we have access to things like social media, we have access to things like YouTube, whereas back then I'm sure we'll probably get into this about the social media kind of conversation. But back then when I started architecture school, there was no one out there on social media telling you how to do a drawing, telling you, talking about the process of, and I mean, I'm only talking, this is only 8-9 years ago, so it's not actually that long ago. YouTube was a thing, social media was a thing, but there wasn't the profiles yet kind of matured enough to be able to provide that kind of insight. And so now is obviously very different. I have a lot of people following and engaging with my account that are about to go into university, and so they're learning quite a lot from profiles like myself on how architecture works. And so it's just a case of timing and understanding that the skill set that I learned, although at the time wasn't as relevant to architecture, it was still helpful and useful to get me through when I didn't necessarily know too much about the profession. And I very quickly caught on to how it kind of works in terms of building a portfolio and the coursework process of the kind of step-by-step process of doing a sketch. You then produce an orthographic drawing, you then touch it up graphically to then put it in a portfolio, and you print it out and you put it into a kind of sleeve, and that's it. And obviously you're doing that multiple times over the course of a year or 2 or 3 years for your degree. And so I very much quickly caught on to that coursework process, and I've always been very kind of logically minded. I think in processes, I think in systems. And so that step-by-step process and that journey that you go through was very much something that I kind of resonated with, and I could understand. So, yeah.
I can totally visualize what you're saying. I'm thinking back, one of the courses I taught was a first-year studio, and I'm thinking now there were students who knew absolutely nothing, had no creative skill, had no understanding of architecture. There's more camps than what I'm describing, but there was one camp. There's another camp of students who knew, to your earlier point, they knew about floor plans, they knew about names of architects and buildings. And then there's a third one where students had, there's one student I remember who had a background in sculpture, not architecture, but he knew how to make things by hand. And he excelled. He did well first year, second year, and I think he did well the rest of the years. And I think that skill set and the thinking that comes with just making something physical, it translates so beautifully over to architecture. So I fully, can visualize what you're saying. I guess, not to focus too much on people who are interested in becoming an architect, but But given that you've thought a lot about this, what would be your recommendation, or what do you recommend to your high school students who say, hey, Thomas, what do I do to prepare for architecture school? I'm sure you've been asked this question before. Like, do I go like to see Sagrada Familia? Do I sketch that building? Is that what I need to do? To like, what do I do?
I mean, if you can, why not?
What do I do to
to prepare
like,
before getting in?
I think it's a very difficult question, because obviously some people will have different levels of experience or backgrounds. But I think one thing that I've learned, and something that I don't do enough, is reading. I think reading massively helps, and seeing examples of architecture and understanding why they're designed in the way that they are. If you could pick yourself up a kind of architecture magazine or some kind of a book about Thomas Heatherwick or Foster, whoever it might be, if you could then look at some examples and understand, okay, well, this is a building that's a leisure centre, or this is an office, and the typologies of architecture, and understanding that there's different sectors and how we kind of design spaces, and how you can have experiential architecture, you could have more functional architecture, you could have more form focused architecture. And so to understand those kind of basic principles of what architecture is through reading, I think is one, really important. The second in preparation, I think, is trying to, whether it's at school or whether it might be a separate course, trying to actively be involved in a course or a subject that is involved in coursework and the process of building a portfolio and putting together imagery, artwork, a bit of text, and trying to piece together something physically in a kind of portfolio sense would definitely help you.
Right.
And I always found that was a massive benefit for me, that studying graphics and art were both coursework focused subjects, which meant that I understood
things that require compositional skills,
correct.
Articulation of parts.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the kind of I guess the combination and the putting together of a document with images, with text, with all of those things, and they're not obviously at school. Sometimes you have maybe exam focused subjects where you're just purely doing exams, but that's not necessarily going to translate across into architecture, because you're very rarely going to be sat in an exam hall sitting in an exam. Obviously, it depends what university and kind of country you're doing it in. So a coursework-based subjects, I think, is always really helpful to understand how those portfolios work and how to put together a document with those elements. And another thing is, if you can do it, visit architecture. Just try and travel and visit, and just try and just see it in the flesh, and kind of feel something when you're there. What do you feel when you're in that space? How does it make you feel with the people that you're with? What kind of sounds does it make? What's the kind of lighting like? Trying to understand how that kind of experience of being in that space makes you feel. And I think that for me, just before I went into university, I actually visited Valencia, and I went to Santiago Calatrava's science park. And I remember at the time I was absolutely amazed at the sheer scale and mass of these buildings, but also the delicacy and the detail and the patterns and the way that it was designed. And I just remember at the time, I didn't know anything about architecture, but I was like amazed by it. And so that inspired me, and it made me feel like, okay, if I did something like that, that'd be pretty amazing. And so just to have that and see it in the flesh and to experience it, and to understand really architecture is more than a drawing, it's more than a set of visuals, it's actually a feeling, it's an experience, it's a journey that you go through in a space. So having that as going into university would be absolutely amazing. So yeah, I think it's those three things. You could say many, but I think they're the three that I would focus on.
I think it's really interesting. I think the three things that you mentioned, I totally agree with it. And the first one about reading is a good one, because I feel like, people get a tendency of getting seduced by the final image of a building, but actually the hardest part, especially in architecture school, is the design thinking. I think that's the hardest thing to teach, and that's the hardest thing to master in the end. In the end, anyone could do a nice, cool-looking building, right? But it's like, what was the process to get there? And can you do it again? Or did you just get lucky, this one time? Yeah. So the reading about architecture, I found it a very, very good advice on my side.
Yeah, and I think
it's interesting because Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think one thing that I learned quickly at architecture school was that architectural theory, to back your ideas and to back your understanding of architecture, is really important. I very much in my final years at university, I very much got into the theory and understood, okay, well, architecture isn't necessarily just a kind of material palette with a bit of structure and some columns and stuff. It's actually about the language of architecture and what story you're trying to tell through the design of the architecture. And that's where the real quality of architectural design comes out, of understanding the theory and the backing, and also examples and precedents of how people have done it in the past and how you can take that and inform that into your own design proposals. And so that comes all from the reading.
So you're in school. What happens next?
What happens next? Well, now I'm in architecture school. It's a shock, I'd say. That's what happens next.
Where you're like, what the heck did I just sign up for?
And I think it's a common feeling. I think most architecture students, as much research as you can do into studying, you'll never actually know what you've got into until you start it, and you have to actually go through the process of then designing a building and taking an idea or a brief that your tutors give you, and then all of a sudden you've got to produce a full set of drawings, floor plans, sections, elevations at different scales, and you've got to present them at the end of it. And so for me, really interestingly enough, as I went through school, I was very introverted and I was very shy. I didn't like talking. I didn't like presenting. I was always that kid where if it was an English class and they asked someone to read a line in or a paragraph out of a book, because I was dyslexic, I am dyslexic, and so I was really, really shy, and that was my worst fear, to sit there and stand in front of people and read in front of them. So then one thing I didn't realize about architecture school is that you present almost every month.
To your whole classmates.
To your whole classmates, and to all your tutors. And so I realized that literally within the first week. I was like, oh wow, we've got to present next week in front of however many people. And so that was a shock to me, and it was a bit of a kind of, okay, I'm going to have to really step up here and really push myself out there and understand how this works and build some confidence up to stand up and speak. And so that was one element that would kind of threw me off a bit. But the other element is obviously the sheer workload and the intensity of it, and trying to navigate, okay, so I've got all of this work to do and I've got to build a portfolio, but I'm also a university student and I need to go out and enjoy myself and socialize. But then I've also got the people and friends to see, and you've got all of these different things and conflicting elements, and then you've got architecture school in the middle of all of that, which is very intense and demanding, and it's requiring an awful lot from you to make models, to do sketches, to present, to put together portfolios. It was kind of chaos in the first year. And so I vividly remember in my first few months at architecture school, I developed insomnia. I struggled to sleep for about 3 months because I was so worked up by it all. I put so much pressure on myself to do well and to be successful, but also I'd got so caught up in the whole machine of all-nighters and everyone spending time in the studio until really late in the morning. And so, although at the time I was trying to make friends, and you want to spend time with people, you want to spend time in the studio, you want to be a part of that culture. But then I realized pretty quickly that I couldn't sustain it, and that I couldn't live for the next. I couldn't finish my degree and then go into a master's degree with this kind of mentality and way of working. And so I very quickly had to realize that, okay, well, I need to cut off at maybe 11 o'clock or midnight at the latest. I'm not going to work any time past that. I'm going to have to start building in some systems and a bit of a routine for me to start studying at certain times of the day to make sure that I can get my work done so I'm not working late. And so because for me, I've always struggled with sleep. It's always been something that I've struggled with ever since I was a child. And so I realized that was going to have to be a priority for me. And so literally after first year university, I didn't do a late night after 2 a.m. for the rest of my architecture career. And so that was a really important turning point for me in the first few months of architecture school, to realize I'm not going to get caught up in all of this. And obviously everyone still to this day is very much involved in the all-nighter culture and that whole toxic architecture school culture. But from a very
has that lessened a little bit though in the past decade?
I would say,
like, what's your reading of the landscape?
I would say in the past 5 years it has. When I was at architecture school,
Yeah.
it was just normal. And it also depends on
Yeah.
tutors. It depends on the type of studios you're in. It depends on the type of attitudes and the mentalities of your tutors. Often you'd have tutors who would
Yeah.
be like, yeah, why haven't you been up all night finishing your model or whatever it might be? They're literally encouraging it. And
Yeah.
and I think also through social media and people advising and talking and saying, look, this is not okay, that we shouldn't accept this kind of culture, that's obviously helped through the process. And I also think generally people these days seem to be healthier. They seem to be more focused on health than other things. And so people are just a little bit more kind of, they kind of latched onto the fact that it's not really a good thing and it's not very sustainable.
Yeah.
Agreed. It's funny now. Students are like eating, quinoa bowls. I'm like, quinoa
I
bowls?
think especially
Hot dogs and chili in college. What are you talking about?
but I think maybe
Quinoa
also,
bowls.
with the whole COVID thing, I think the wellness and kind of like mental
Yeah, that's
health
true.
is like a big deal, which, it should be a big deal. And especially in school, because if you get burnt out while you're in school, then it's kind of it. Like then, like your working life is going to suck, what
I think a lot of us have had stories where we get burned out. That happened to me in school for sure. But I love that you realized, I would say fairly quickly after year one, that you needed to have a change. I think was incredibly smart of you. It also makes me laugh that you then say, I never went past 2 a.m. And for people who are not architects, are like, what the fuck? Like, that's considered reining it in, is not going past midnight or
That's
2
pretty
a.m.
good going. That's pretty good.
It is by our internal standards.
But it's also a very good advice, for students who are currently in school and like are on the verge of, burning out or even thinking about quitting architecture school, I think, because it really, took you from making that one change to make it more sustainable, to see the end of your studies versus being like, I can't do it, like this is too much, and then just giving up.
Right.
When maybe you should not giving up.
And I always found the dropout rate at architecture school was incredible. The amount of people that would drop off year by year. You'd go through first year and maybe 25% of the cohorts dropped off. You go in second year, another 10%'s gone.
Yep.
Final year, you've then got half a cohort left. Everyone's dropped off. And I understand, obviously, within that, there's personal reasons with family or whatever it might be, and things out of their control, not related to architecture school. But then there's things where people fall out with tutors, and it becomes quite messy and quite a toxic environment. And so I'm always, and have been always, since that moment really, since that first year where I really struggled, I've always been a massive advocate, and I'm very I communicate the importance of health and well-being, and to not let this world and this whole thing and this toxic culture sometimes really detriment your health and well-being, because it really can, and people really can get caught up in it and really struggle with it.
Yeah, and then also there's definitely a threshold, right, where if you're pushing too hard, the work itself does suffer. Yeah. Like you're just not productive at the end of the day, if we want to put it succinctly. Yeah. But I think also in this part of the conversation, it reminds me that a lot of times when students are in a situation like that, they sometimes falsely view it as it being kind of like this dichotomy of either I can either do all-nighters or I quit. And if I don't do all-nighters and don't, put in X amount of time, that means that I'm not putting in enough time and the work is going to suffer, and I'm not going to get the most out of my, experience or whatever, or get the best out of the project. But I think like there's, obviously it's not just those two choices. And for myself, one thing I learned at some point in school, probably much later on than you, I wasn't as fast to figure this out, was like, it's not about like, so putting in that 14th hour of work doesn't always equal money in the bank. Instead, it's like, well, putting in less time, it simply means that you just have to be much more thoughtful of where you're spending your time and prioritizing things. So like when you were describing all the stuff that an architecture student has to do, the plans, the presentations, the this and that, I was thinking to myself, wow, that's a lot of work. That's a lot of work to do for a student.
I know.
And I think that the truth is, and I don't think a lot of teachers would say this, like when it gets down to the back half of a semester or quarter, you as a student, most of them, you cannot produce all of those things at perfect level across the board. And in some ways, I think it's the teacher's responsibility to say, hey, you can't do that. You have to understand that's the case, and it doesn't mean you're failing, it doesn't mean you're giving up, it means you're being smart. So when you go to make that presentation, what are the things that matter the most for you, for the project, for whatever criteria, focus on those. Because if you try and do everything at 100 miles an hour, you will burn out for sure. Yeah. And I think I don't know. I feel like that was never said or not said enough. I don't know if it's teachers who are afraid that students would just, call it and give up. But that's truthfully how it works in reality anyway. You can't do everything perfectly, and you have to prioritize.
Yeah, you have to work smarter, not harder. That's what I always say. You have to be clever with it, because it's sadly one thing that they don't really teach at university. They don't teach you how to time manage. They don't teach you how to priority manage. They don't tell you how to allocate your time and focus your energy on particular things. And it's something that you kind of just got to figure out for yourself. But the problem that ends up happening is, okay, you spend too much time on one particular thing. You spend weeks on a floor plan, and you're working away at the floor plan, and there's no cutoff point. And then you realize, oh my word, I've got my presentation in a few days' time, and then that's when you end up doing the back-to-back all-nighters, trying to do everything else that you need to do. Whereas I always try and say, Lord, put everything in a list, write everything that you have in a list, and then define it by day, by week, by month, even 3 months. At the start of a semester, I would plan the next 3 or 4 months, day by day, of what I needed to do and when I need to do it by. And that was my only way of managing to do the architecture thing, and also my YouTube stuff, and me trying to build this brand that I'm sure we'll get into at some point. So you have to find a strategy and a system to make it work for you. And if you don't, you will just end up really struggling. You will go down an avenue there where you are going to really burn out, and you're going to suffer, and you're going to struggle. And I think it would be really helpful if universities taught that. If they had a program or a few lectures just purely about time management and priority management, because it's also really important in practice. I mean, we talk about it all the time when we're talking about resources and who's available and what work needs to be done. And you talk about it constantly, but it was never talked about at university, which is strange.
It's very strange. And also because architecture, in my experience, I'm guessing it's the same for you, a lot of the discourse and the education of it, the big word is process. But like, no one ever talks about the process of the person, like what it feels like to be doing the thing. Like that's like the base process. That's the first thing to start with. And it's just not, like, I've always thought it would be smart to have, and I know a few people are doing this, like an architectural coach, but more to what you're saying and less of like, actually critiquing the work itself.
I mean, to be devil's advocate, it's hard in school too, because I think,
but you were organized. For me, it was hard in school.
No, but if you're a good teacher, you also want every student to find their own process. Like, there is not necessarily one recipe fits all, right? Sure. And also that could unveil very interesting and different processes depending on the individual and their interest and how their brain, even chemically works, right? So it's kind of hard. Like, maybe it should be taught, maybe it shouldn't be taught too early, so you can still try and figure out like what is your process before someone like tries to teach you one that's not yours.
When you say process, do you mean design process, or do you mean
like a management process?
Yeah,
design
like being
process.
organized.
I mean, being organized, I think could be taught. Like one thing, like for example, I took the AREs, right? The licensing exam in the States. And I failed a few, and I was like, you know what, this is not working, right? So I ended up doing a schedule of like, okay, every day I'm doing 2 hours of study, and I'm like mapping out the whole, all of the exams and what subject, to make sure that I'm doing like all of the hours and everything I have to do to get ready for the tests. And it's the same thing with client presentation. You have a client presentation. You can't just focus on like that one rendering of the kitchen. No, what I start by doing is I start an InDesign file of the presentation. I know I'm going to have a page with references. I know I'm going to have a page with a floor plan. And so every time I go in the file, I could see the stuff, like where I am basically. Yeah. Same with a portfolio, same with a final presentation for a project. I think having the board and just storing stuff on it, or even pinning up on the wall, again, to show you like where are you in the narrative, like what part of the story are you still missing, and which one do you have, figured out enough that you can move on to something else. But yeah, that would be a very good class to have, someone who's kind of like basically helping you focus your attention where it needs to go.
It would have saved years in my life, probably.
Probably still will for me, for sure. Yeah.
It's not too late.
The idea of engaging in social media through whatever ways, did that come into the fold while you were in architecture school? And how did that, come into your vision?
Yeah, so it's actually really quite a random story. It wasn't so straightforward as people would assume. Really, what happened was, before I actually started university, before I started architecture school, I was very much into fitness. I was absolutely obsessed with fitness, health, and bodybuilding. Basically, I really wanted to get into bodybuilding. And at the time, I was an avid watcher of these kind of fitness YouTubers who they would vlog their day-to-day life. They would film them getting up in the morning, making a cup of tea, and then go into the gym, eating their meals, going to the shop, getting into bed. They would literally film every moment of their day. They would call it a day in the life. And so I was really quite interested and intrigued by these people who would document their whole process of training, eating, their routine, their sleep patterns, all of this stuff to optimize their fitness, their bodybuilding potential. And so at the time, this was when I was 16 years old, a year before studying architecture. And so I got into training, I got into fitness, and I thought, well, why can't I potentially document some of my journey? I was very much interested in photography at the time. I was very interested in documenting things, and I'd realized that YouTube was a thing where people could upload videos, and I'd seen these people that I were watching were very successful. They had their own businesses, they were selling products, they had their own clothing lines, they were selling protein, whatever it might be. They were making serious money, and they were being very successful through YouTube. And this was back in 2017. And so I essentially started documenting my journey. I picked up a camera. I just started filming my gym sessions. I started filming me cooking dinner. Generally just almost trying to emulate and replicate what they were doing, because I just saw it as quite a nice lifestyle. Anyway, fast forward to getting into architecture school, I was very much in the swing of making YouTube videos, making 1 or 2 YouTube videos a week. I started architecture school. Obviously, I wanted to keep it up as much as I possibly could, realizing very quickly that architecture school was taking over my life and taking over a significant portion of my time. And so what ended up happening is, as I was making these fitness videos week by week, most of my days would end up spent in studio. And I was thinking, well, I actually can't film anything regarding fitness here because I'm always in the studio. And so literally one day I just decided I'll film a day in the life of an architecture student. And so this was at a point where I was also aware that there wasn't anyone else out there on YouTube that was making a day in the life type content for architecture students. And so I'd obviously seen all of these other industries doing it, the fitness industry, the fashion industry, whatever it might be. They were all doing this type of content, this vlogging style content, but architecture didn't have anything. And so I very much was looking for someone who produced that type of content. And by looking for someone, I realized there wasn't anyone there. And so I kind of latched on to the idea of, well, in many ways, why didn't I be that person? I'm kind of vlogging my day-to-day life. I could upload some videos about architecture and see how it goes. And so I filmed a day in the life of an architecture student with no real intention of going into architecture content. It was just purely a one-off from my fitness content. And the video did really well. It got 250,000 views in the space of 2 or 3 months, which at the time was like, and still today on YouTube was like, oh wow, that's it's an awful lot of views. So all of a sudden I realized that there was a demand and an interest in people seeing the process of an architecture student and what it actually looks like to be an architecture student. Because if I'd known someone who was documenting their life as an architecture student, at least then I'd have an idea as to what I was getting into, what the process was like in terms of putting together a portfolio or how to scale a drawing, as I mentioned earlier, or different types of drawings, or even your day-to-day schedule of lectures and going into the workshop or going into the studio or whatever it might be. And so really I stumbled upon it really, and I didn't really necessarily plan to do architecture content. And so because that video did so well, occasionally every month or so I would do an architecture video. I was still doing loads of fitness bodybuilding stuff at this point, but occasionally I would kind of sprinkle in a little portfolio review or another day in the life, or I would do a day in the life in studio, or I remember at the time I did a deadline week video. So I documented the whole week of me doing my final submission for my first year portfolio. And so I really started doing more and more and more, which every time I did an architecture video, my views would massively increase. But obviously, I was still being quite stubborn in that I wanted to be this fitness guy, this fitness YouTuber, because I was still massively into training. Anyway, fast forward probably 2 years now into my final year of my undergraduate degree. And I just decided to go all in on architecture content. Literally one of the first weeks, I think it was 2020, I just went all in and thought, you know what, I'm just going to try this architecture thing. I've been trying not to do it, and I've been putting it off, and I've been really pushing this fitness avenue. But fitness at the time, and it still is, very saturated. You need to have either an unreal physique or strength, or something really unique about you to stand out. Whereas architecture, I realized that I was one of the only people doing it, so that it was quite easy for me to stand out, because I could build my own kind of niche and path in this architecture world. And so that's really what started this architecture content and me exploring architecture through social media. And so from 2020, I then went full-time content, and I was producing 2 or 3 videos a week for 3 or 4 years, which back to back, churning out content. And unfortunately, I haven't actually done a YouTube video in about 2 years now, because when I went into practice, I had no time again. And so I couldn't produce content of the quality that I wanted to, because I've been working in practice. And so Instagram then became a big thing, because it was quick, fast-paced pictures, short-form content, much quicker pace that I could produce a reel in the space of 2 or 3 hours, whereas a YouTube video would take me almost a day to do. And so I started leaning more and more into Instagram, which then grew in itself. And I've then built a large kind of profile and following on Instagram as well. So that's kind of how I landed in this architecture social media world. And I've just continued to pursue it because I really am passionate about it. And I see the opportunity. I still think we're really early in this kind of phase of architecture, social media profiles and creators. I don't think the profession is quite matured to social media yet. Hence why I actually wrote a book about it, because I'm trying to kind of encourage people and push people and say, look, this is the new way of branding and marketing yourself as an architect, and potentially even a new way of thinking as an architect and kind of acting as an architect. And so it's a really interesting point, I think, in time at the moment, where we have so many creators that are coming through, but it could be so much bigger. If we think about other industries like fashion, it's a massive part of their marketing. It's almost like every fashion agency, one of their core marketing avenues is social media. But for architecture, for some reason, we're still hesitant, or we're still slightly behind the curve in understanding how to operate it. Yes, we use it, but we don't necessarily use it to its potential, to its maximum.
And now a little break for our show sponsors. Are you tired of juggling multiple pieces of software and struggling with spreadsheets that aren't made for the realities of design and architecture in 2023? Built by and for designers and architects, Programma's all-in-one suite of tools has everything modern studios need for every stage of a project. Mood boards, the world's best specification tools, procurement tracking, project management, and more. All smartly integrated, easily shareable, and always up to date, reducing time-consuming double handling and costly errors. Share your work in various formats, from PDF to client-friendly, up-to-date online dashboards. Join the ranks of leading studios using Programma today. Click the Programma link in our show notes to start for free. This episode is brought to you by Chaos. They make award-winning design and visualization tools, and they're really pushing the boundaries with AI. Now, AI is shaking up the architecture and design world, and Chaos is taking a responsible approach. Their tools are built to help architects, designers, and visualization specialists to work faster and explore more ideas without replacing creativity. Basically, Chaos wants AI to make your imagination stronger, not take over. So you get to design with more freedom, create stunning visuals, and stay in control of your work. If you want to see what that looks like, tap the Chaos link in our show notes.
Dear architects, design leaders, and founders redefining the industry, if you want to shape not only buildings, but the business behind them, this is your moment. Future London Academy's Executive MBA takes you inside the boardrooms of Pentagram, Uber, Zaha Hadid Architects, and Google, where you'll master finance, strategy, strategy, and operations from the people who already excel at them. Study along peers transforming the industry worldwide and do it all in just 9 intensive weeks over 1 year between London and California. The program is award-winning, transformative, and crafted for design and architecture leaders with 15 or more years of experience. If you're ready to grow your impact, apply now by tapping the Future London Academy link in our show notes. Are you thinking, so I have a bunch of questions, but real quick, are you thinking that, so when you say architecture is not leveraging social media, are you thinking architectural practices and the audience being the general public, i.e. clients, or are you thinking more peer-to-peer, discourse, let's call it? I
think definitely the first point there, the practices. I think generally younger people are obviously much more savvy with social media, and the generation of probably up to people my age, we're obviously very active on social media. We understand how it works. We understand how engagement works and dopamine and the fast-paced nature of social media. Whereas I feel like the practices that are probably more developed and more mature, they obviously have their own certain ways of getting clients on board. They have their own marketing strategies. They have their own bidding processes, whatever it might be. And so they're kind of used to doing that, and they understand that process, and it works for them. But it could be so much bigger, and they could be doing so much more with the opportunity of a free tool like social media. Yes, it costs you resource and time, obviously, but it's a free tool, and you can reach almost anyone at any point in time, anywhere in the globe, in an instant. And it's almost like it's huge. Obviously, it's huge. It's been around for many years now, and I think there's billions and billions of active users on social media. But for some reason, practices don't necessarily lean into it to build their clientele and to build their portfolio. Instead, they almost use it as a kind of portfolio piece and a repurposing of website content, and they just publish images or whatever it might be, rather than leaning into it as, no, look, we can show you the value we offer you and the service that we can offer you, and what our kind of unique selling proposition is as a practice.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting because you're right. If you think about, all of the firms that you see posting stuff on, let's say, Instagram, it's all about the final product. It's all very pretty pictures, very pretty buildings. If I'm a client and I'm browsing on Instagram, I'll probably like, a few of these, but it doesn't tell me anything about who's behind those creations, like who am I actually hiring. And some clients maybe don't care. They just want the exact same thing that they just liked as an image, and they don't care to really know or understand who they're hiring. But you're right. I think there is kind of a missed opportunity for firms to stand out as showing their architectural personalities on social media, and a little bit of behind the curtain, to be honest. Because you're right. If I want to see a portfolio, I just go to the firm's website. I don't need, I feel like social media, there's the word social in it, right? Which means interaction, you kind of show more than just the cover in a way.
I think it's, I've thought a little bit about this over the years, and I think there's a few things as to why the transition or the adoption of social media hasn't happened the way you're describing. I think first, architects historically are not great and not very interested as a group, as a whole, of doing marketing of any kind. For an office to put any effort into marketing is especially an older office, is kind of a miracle, right? It's all referral based, and they just don't, for whatever reason, they're not interested in it. They don't put time into it. And I think that's one thing as a base. I think also later on top of that, so much of the content, and there's definitely an age gap, a generational aspect to this for sure, right? But I think so much of the content that gets the most hits and traction on YouTube or Instagram or Twitter or whatever, from the perspective of someone who's not deeply engaged with them, are the ones that have very flashy graphics, big neon pink fonts flying around and stuff. And this type of vibe, let's say, for lack of a better word, or aesthetic even, and it represents, aesthetically, it doesn't align with a lot of architects, but it also represents a way of thinking and being that just feels incongruous with architecture and architects who take themselves, for the most part, very, very seriously. We all wear black, and buildings take a long time. So I think I'm not saying this is an excuse whatsoever, but I think there's this disconnect, right, between almost like the seriousness of what architects do, or what, and then the levity that social media seems to have when it's, bright neon pink font, as an extreme example.
Yeah.
So that's something I've thought about. And I'm like, I'm not quite sure. And obviously there's plenty of social media accounts and people like yourself who have a very refined approach to it. But I think on the surface, I can see that for older architects, this is why they're not very interested in it, perhaps. I don't know.
And I think they're two really, really great points. And I think an additional one to that is confidentiality. I think when I've been working in practice, one thing that they've been very careful of is, well, we can't necessarily show this process. We can't necessarily show the behind the scenes because this is a confidential project, and we don't want to. We don't necessarily want to give away their selling point. They don't want to give away their secrets to what makes their projects their projects. And so I think it is very challenging for practices, and so you almost have to do the content after the fact. So once the process and the project is done, you then go back in time and then you talk through the process and document the process. Or maybe you document the process throughout doing it, but don't actually release the content until the product is done.
Yeah.
And so you can do it that way. But confidentiality has always been an issue. And I always find that whenever I've worked in places, they've always been very careful and asked me to be careful with what I say and what I show and what I do, because obviously they want to make sure that they keep their cards close to the chest and they're not giving away what their really kind of unique selling points are. That said, I do think it's a massive shame, because you then are confining something that could not only be useful for a client to see and could be interesting for them to see and understand how you work and your processes, but also for the general public to be able to build a bit of a brand reputation and understanding of, this is how we do things, this is our process, this is what makes us special. And because by building a brand identity and a brand reputation, what it does is it gives you not only exposure to your brand and to grow your brand and build it as an entity, but also to be able to encourage employees and potential employers to potential employees to work with you. So it's all about talent management, bringing in talent. And so I think that's a really big one, that a lot of architecture students and people trying to get into architecture, they look at the practices that they like the work of, and they look inside of their websites and to see what the kind of people are and how many people work there and what they kind of do and what their office looks like. And if a practice has a suite of content where it's behind the scenes stuff, talking about their process, some of their employees are talking on camera, and you can see the kind of personalities and the vibe of the place, you're going to be more inclined to want to work with them because you see more of what they do and who they are and how they operate. And it's also the same the other way around. For people like myself, I'm very out there. You can very much see my personality, my work, my expertise, my skill set, my downfalls. You can see everything out there on social media. And so almost when I go for a job interview, it's like the interview before the interview. They can scout me out, they can vet me out already. They can see very much if I'm the kind of person they want to work with. And so it goes both ways. I think it's a really great way of showing personality and showing how people can connect with you, because at the end of the day, people pay and want to work with people. They don't necessarily want, yes, some clients probably will just want the final product, but they also themselves want to go through a process and have a trust that this person is going to deliver what I want as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's transparency is another aspect of all of this. But so what you just said, though, it made me laugh because so, we started the podcast, years ago. And once it started to gain some traction, so we have our own practice and we have the podcast. And of course, anyone who has their own practice, when they have a bad month or a bad year, like, man, should I just phone it in and just transition, go back to working at an office? Because in a lot of ways, it's a lot easier. But anyway, I say that because I'm like, well, the thing is, we've had this podcast and we're like decently well known, we're not like famous, but what would the office think if they knew of the podcast? We'd be like, nope, there's no fucking way we're hiring this guy. You've said too much crazy shit out there on the Ethernet. And so for you, that's basically what's happened, except for you know, saying crazy shit. So have you ever gone to an interview and then be like, I don't know, because I don't know, they had reservations? Did they make you sign something that say, well, you can't talk about our office like ever? Like, how does that work? Because that's a new one, right? That this kind of situation probably didn't exist, you know, 15 years ago for sure.
Yeah, and I think people that I've spoke to that run practices and that have their own business have always said to me that you're an asset. You're an asset to the business because you're not only bringing a skill set that is valuable because you understand how to engage people, you understand how to communicate both visually and verbally, and also to be able to market and reach people, which is obviously a great skill set to have. And so people always say that it's great if you worked with us because you would give us exposure, you could work with us, we could work together, it could help us as a brand, and that brand association as well between our two brands. But then there's other people that I've spoke to who are very much like, as long as you don't say anything or associate yourself with us, we're fine with it. And so there's those two sides of it, and I always see that it's a shame when people don't want you to be involved and utilize the thing that you've built, because it's so. I think what I have is my page is very curated. Even though I show my personality and I'm talking to the camera and I show my work and everything, it's still curated. I'm not saying anything that's controversial or that is out there or that's going to rub people the wrong way. I'm very kind of, I'm careful with what I do. And
smarter than us.
but that's what makes your podcast so unique and successful, because of that transparency. That is your USP, really. And I think you do it really well. And you're in a position where you run your own practice, and you're in a position where you can say those things because you're not trying to get the next roll up in becoming an architect or whatever it might be. You have obviously when you're younger and you're more my age, where you're trying to make your way through the profession, if you rub people up the wrong way and say stupid things, and people are obviously going to look at you and think, yeah, no, I'm not, I don't really want to work with that person. Whereas if you're careful and curated and you build something that's a really successful piece and people can see the value in it, then it's a different conversation. And so I've personally found that it helps me. It helps me find opportunities. It helps me find collaborations. I wouldn't have been able to write the book if I hadn't have had this profile and this platform. And so it gives you opportunities. It gives you the opportunity to be able to show yourself, to show your personality, and to reach out to the people that you never would think that you would even come across. For example, if I hadn't have built my profile, I wouldn't be here right now talking on a podcast with you guys. And it's the same, that it goes the other way as well. And so the people that you connect with and the relationships that you build and the people that you get to know, I think it's extremely valuable. And they always say networking is extremely important, and social media is almost like the perfect networking scenario. It's the easiest way to connect with people, the quickest way to connect with people, and you connect with people across the globe. You don't have to show up to a networking event anymore.
A conference.
You meet them in an instant online from your lounge or from your bed. You don't necessarily need to get yourself out there.
Brush your teeth.
Shower.
I mean, I still advise people to do
No,
that.
but it's true. You should brush your teeth.
So kind of a quick overview of timeline, just so I have it in my mind. Yep. So when did you finish school? What year did you finish school?
So I finished my master's degree in 2023. So
okay, cool. And so you've been practicing now. Okay, gotcha. So you've been practicing for a couple years now.
So I've been in practice for 2 years. So I took a period of time off. I took about 6 months off after finishing my master's. So I finished in about May, June time, and then I went all the way around to January 24 before I went back into practice, because just coming out the other end of it all and doing it back to back felt very intense. And even though as I said earlier about building the strategies and the systems and the priority management, time management, not going to bed too late, all of those things, it still does grind you down over a period of time. And so I needed a period of time before before going back into practice. Saying that, I actually no longer practice. So I actually qualified as an architect back in October, so 3 months ago. And then pretty soon after, I actually left my role, and I now work full-time in this social media space. This is actually an exclusive. I've never actually mentioned this before. It's not actually present on my page yet. But yeah, I have left my role in practice, and I'm now pursuing the role of the architect through this digital world and through social media, which I'm trying to navigate at this point and trying to understand what exactly it is I'm doing and trying to communicate. But fundamentally, I'm trying to build a profile that guides and inspires and motivates individuals. I want to be kind of like an online mentor for architecture professionals, architecture students, and trying to explore architecture through this means. So that's currently where I'm at when we think of the timeline. So I'm about 2 months into working, 1 month working into full-time self-employment at this point.
Cool. That's awesome. That's amazing.
Yeah, that's a big
Do you have, and I know things are early on or maybe a bit murky, like you said, but do you have any inklings as to what the end is going to look like, the end service or product? Is it you acting as a consultant, mostly to architecture offices and helping them establish a brand, so to speak? Is it doing more books? Is it rebuilding adding more videos to YouTube that you left off from, or like what do you think is going to happen?
It's pretty much all of the above. I'm in the process of fundamentally, the core of what I do will always be my personal brand. Tomrowstudios will be my kind of foundation. And with that, I will have collaborations, I'll have brand deals, I'll be writing books, mini projects here and there, of course. But what I'm trying to build currently is a social media specific marketing agency for architecture practices. So what I have realized, and the whole part of me writing this book, was I realized that, as we've kind of spoke about here, we're still slightly behind the curve. I found that practices need support and guidance in understanding how to utilize social media strategically to help them gain exposure, to be able to seek talent, to be able to find clients, everything that we've kind of discussed previously. And so I want to continue to position myself to be someone who delivers that service and supports architecture practices to be able to gain exposure and build their brand identity. And so I'm going to be almost kind of like a consultant. I'm building this with a partner. So there's going to be 2 of us doing it. I can't tell you the name yet because we haven't fully confirmed it, but we're currently in the process of building this media type agency where we're going to be hopefully trying to help individuals, practices, brands within the architecture world deliver social media content creation.
That's wonderful. That's really exciting.
I'm very excited to see that. Yeah.
The so we'll probably talk to you again and dive more into those details once once things are launched and whatnot. But when you decided to go back to practicing, did you think that you were going to possibly stay there and practice, for the long term, 10, 15, 20, 30 years, and that be your career? Or did you know that it was going to be short? And what led you to decide to break off and do your own thing?
I think it was a bit of a process for me, because I think trying to build your own thing and trying to build your own brand, yes, you get opportunities to work with people and collaborate with people and work with brands or whatever it might be. But obviously to actually sustain that as a business financially is another question. And so what I've been doing is, over the past few years, it's been incrementally growing, and I've been building it as I kind of go along. And so it was always in my head that I wanted to have my own thing. Building my own business and doing my own thing and being my own boss was always a dream of mine. It was always a plan, whether that was going to be an architecture practice or not. And so growing up, I always wanted my own architecture studio. But obviously, as I learned more about architecture and I went through the process of doing my exams and qualification, I realized more and more that is a really unrealistic path for me, because I found it really quite a challenging process, and all the complications in regards to liability and risk and And as you guys will know, it's very challenging and complicated. And so I realized that wasn't necessarily the path that I wanted to go down. And so building this social media thing and continue it growing gave me encouragement that this could be something that I could build on and that I could do in future. And so coming out of university and continue to do this, it was always in the back of my mind that this could eventually become something that I could lean into fully and that I could turn into a full-time job. And so as I went through my qualification, the key and the mission was always to become an architect. That was always my foundation, and I always want that to be underneath me. Not only because I want it as the title, but also because I do still want to practice as an architect in future. I still want to be involved in architecture. I still want to be involved in the profession. I very much see myself in a few years' time potentially getting into practice, or it being a part of my kind of arc of the content that I create. We might end up delivering architectural services to clients that will then be a part of their, for argument's sake, could be part of their content. So we could provide some kind of architectural service within what we do. And so what I always planned on doing was, when the time came when I became an architect, I would make the decision. I'd either make the decision of going all in and being an architect and focus full time on my work, and almost kind of push my personal brand aside a little bit, or I push the other way. I push the practice aside and I go full time into content, because really what I also found was it's quite unsustainable me doing both. I would work 9 to 5:30 in my job. I would then go home and spend most of my evening working till midnight every night on my content. And so it became very unsustainable. My girlfriend would constantly telling me to get off my laptop, but it became a situation where it wasn't sustainable, and I couldn't sustain it for a long period of time. And I realized that because I was really struggling with the workload. And so I had to make a decision. It was either one or the other. And I couldn't see myself giving up a business and a brand that I'd built myself for the past, this year marks 9 years of me doing this. And so I couldn't give that up. And so it just made the natural and logical sense for me to make the move and to do it and to just go for it. And I still think it's a risky move. But in my eyes, it's more of a risk me not taking the risk at this point of my life. At my age currently, with not the responsibilities that I will have in the future with children and mortgage and whatever it might be, all the fun stuff, that I'll be looking forward to, now felt like the right moment. And so I went for it with the book coming out only the month before as well. And so I've kind of I've gone for it. I've gone all in. I'm going to try and make it work, and we'll see how we get on. I'm convinced I'll try and make something work, but we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah. Well, we're rooting for you. I'm sure it'll turn out fine. And also, like you said, in the larger arc of history with communication and architecture, this is an interesting moment. And I agree, we're still in the first wave, the first chapter, the first early adoption kind of phase in the grander scheme of things when it comes to social media.
And you can always go back and work for a firm if it doesn't work out. It's not like you don't have a plan B. So
yeah. The book. So when what do we have? We have another 15-ish minutes. So when did the idea of the book first occur, and how long did it take for you to establish it? And as a preface, so we were very, very honored and kindly invited by you to be a participant in the book and provide some images and whatever else. And small kind of somewhat anecdotal detail, there it is. So the thing is with this book, the cover's awesome. Sometimes we see like architecture, tangential books. I'm like, that's a shit cover. Like, come on. Then I don't trust whoever wrote it because the cover's not good. Yeah. I don't know. That's probably not fair. But also,
and then there's no images in it, and I'm like, what?
There's no pop-up there. But so leading up when you were corresponding to us and you were saying, hey, do you want to participate? Blah blah blah. Your communication skills that one might imagine were extremely good. Like the emails were very cleanly written. It sounds silly to talk about emails, but like it was very cleanly written, and you followed up like you were just super professional.
This is why you should work with Thomas when he starts his agency.
Well, we'll be talking offline about that for sure. But but like you probably get hit up by a lot of different people, as do we, and so much of it is just poorly presented and not curated in any sense at all. And I'm like, I just don't have the time to sift through or to frankly pay attention to everybody, to all the people who are reaching out, and there's no like syntax, there's no grammar, there's no nothing. They claim to have stuff and they don't really. But you really stood out, one, because of your profile already, but just the way with you handled it. So I just wanted to say that on the show because I thought it was very impressive. But anyway, so yeah, tell us about the book and how it came to be.
So the book was always an idea in the back of my head. I mean, I grew up dyslexic. I hated reading. I hated writing. I was really bad at it. As I mentioned, going back all the way to school when I hated reading in front of the class, and yeah, it was never one of my strong points at all. It was very much a weak point. And so as I kind of grew up and I started building this profile and it became more and more of a thing, I always thought in the back of my mind, well, what if I wrote a book? That would be pretty cool. As a dyslexic person who always hated reading and writing, if I could write a book, that would be pretty amazing. And so I actually helped and supported a friend of mine, Hamza Sheikh, who you might have seen before. He wrote a book called Drawing Attention through RIBA, so the Royal Institute of British Architects. And I supported the marketing campaign for the book, so I helped deliver the marketing campaign. And so through that, I made some connections and I met various people through that. And so a few months later, fundamentally, I was approached by the RIBA and they, by RIBA, sorry, they prefer saying RIBA, not RIBA. And so they approached me with this idea of writing this book. And obviously straight away in my head, yes, that makes perfect sense. It's exactly what I want to write. I've wanted to write a book now for the past few years. It fits perfectly with my brand. It's the direction, it was everything that I want to go in, the direction I want to go in, it made sense. And so in many ways, I was actually surprised that they kind of approached with the idea, because a lot of people have obviously asked me, or did you approach them and whatnot? Because obviously you would ordinarily think that if I had the idea, you'd go to them, but it actually was the other way around. And so it was obviously a clear decision that I was going to say yes and that I was going to move forward with it. So that's how the book came about. And then you go through a process of doing kind of your proposals and whatnot, which was all accepted, and we got through it. And so a big part of the book is that I didn't want it to all be about my profile and my understanding and my knowledge about social media, because as we know, the architecture space and any space within social media is all about different people's approaches and strategies. There's many different approaches that you can come from a content type. You can do long form content, short form content, podcast, audio only. You can do many different types of things, written content, but you can also have lots of different styles and lots of different brand identities and lots of different personalities and different ways of maybe adding humor into your work or adding more kind of, let's say, kind of off the cuff comedic value, for example. And so I realized that there was many different profiles across the architecture profession that seemed to be doing very well in their own little thing, in their own little niche. And so what I wanted to do was bring them all into the book. I wanted to create a book that was almost like a strategy, a guide for architecture practices, for individuals, for brands, to be able to learn and understand how they can utilize social media and all the strategies that are involved that make a social media profile successful. And so to do that, I wanted to bring in all of the best profiles that I could get a hold of, you being obviously one of them. And so obviously I wanted to cover as many bases as possible: podcasts, more kind of tutorial-based content, more course-based content, more humor-based stuff, as many different things, people at different stages of their career, architects, practices, students, whatever it might be, try and get as much variety as I possibly could. And I was very, very fortunate to be able to get 21 different practices, individuals, students involved.
It's a lot of work.
It was a lot of work. Yeah. It was quite a process to get it over the line and to write it. But it helped by the fact that people were contributing. And this was a process of me collaborating with individuals. I always see it as, although it's got my name on it and it's technically authored by myself, it's a collaboration between all of these amazing profiles. And so that's the kind of crux of the book. It's a guide, it's a practical guide. The idea is that for anyone that wants to build a personal brand, they can pick up the book, they can follow the strategies. So I have a kind of architectural influence framework is what I call it, which is message, process, strategy. or message strategy process, sorry. And so the message is all about, what is the brand identity? What are you trying to communicate? Why are you setting up this profile? What is it about you that you want to kind of tell the world? The strategy then is, okay, well, how are you going to communicate that? Is that going to be through short form content, long form content, written content? And how are you going to do that? You can do that through humor. You're going to do that through informal conversations. Is it going to be about being transparent? Whatever it might be, how are you going to be able to communicate that message? And then the process is, what is the process of producing that content?
Okay, so message strategy process.
Message strategy process. So the idea is that if you read the book, you can see the full suite of, from start to finish, how to build a brand and how to create that content. And so it's built as a practical guide, as something that someone can pick up.
Yeah.
Whether it's someone who's quite experienced within creating content, or someone who's just starting out, or someone who doesn't have any idea at all. They pick it up, they understand how it works. That's the crux of the book, fundamentally. And so in terms of actually writing it, it took me from start to finish about 2 years. And so you have to go through a process of drafts and final manuscripts, and then it goes to press, and then it goes into the print, and then you get the print out at the other end. And so it was a 2-year process of writing it. And so obviously it was initially first confirming if people were interested, and trying to get people on board and convince them of being involved. And then out the other end, it's all about then building the marketing strategy for delivering the book.
That's amazing. I've always said that people who write books, I'm blown away by it, because it's not something I could ever do. I would struggle.
I don't think anyone would want to read your book.
I think that's true too. But hardly want to listen to this thing, let alone a book. So prior to the book, right? You were probably quite tapped into the social media scene and aware of various key players. But because of the process of the book and creating it, did you learn about more new people you didn't know beforehand? And I guess my broader question is, like, what did you learn about the social media space as a result of this research endeavor, the book?
Yeah, I mean, I learned and met a lot of people along the way. I mean, there was times when I would speak to people and I would say, look, I'm trying to get this type of profile in. Would you have any recommendations? And someone would kind of forward me a profile, and I would reach out to them, because there was a process of, someone might say no, or they don't have the time to actually contribute. And then so all of a sudden I have to divert and go off on a tangent slightly. And so writing the book, I think what I learned most was actually, to be fair, I actually learned an awful lot writing the book, because I actually did my own research into various strategies and how to actually deliver strategies such as unique selling points, the hook, for example, whatever it might be. There's so many layers to it, and I actually realized as I was going along that I couldn't actually cover it all. I couldn't actually cover every corner, because to build a social media profile and to be successful on social media, there is so much to it. It's a massive, massive thing. And to try and write that within 40,000 words became almost impossible. So I had to really cut it down and be quite clear and to the point, and make sure that everything that I said hit kind of what I wanted it to say. And I wasn't really just scraping the surface. There's a kind of balance between it. But also I couldn't go in as much detail as I would have liked to. So I could have probably doubled the size of the book and put more profiles in and more strategies, because there's so much to kind of cover. And so I learned an awful lot actually about strategies whilst writing the book. But I also learned very much so that the architecture profession is still early in this phase. And even though there's an awful lot of amazing profiles out there, we're talking only, I'd say maximum 50 profiles out there that are probably above 10k followers, for example. 20 of them being in the book, and realizing that there's actually a really small pool of people that are actually really well known and popular in the space, made me kind of reinforce the fact that this is really early, and we still need to push this and communicate the value of social media to architecture practices and individuals. And so learning that throughout this process, and also doing my research into the amount of practices that are actually in social media and how many followers they have, I actually found out that Zaha Hadid is the largest following practice on social media. I
really?
think they have a total of 4.5 million followers. It's probably significantly more.
Wow, that's a lot.
But in the UK, I believe the total follow count across all practices is only 20 million. So you're talking a quarter of that coming from one practice. And so it makes you realize that really it's a very small pool of people. 20 million followers is not really that many if you think there's billions and billions of people on social media. So it made me realize that the practices don't have large followings. They're not utilizing social media and engaging it in the way that I think many other industries are, and how much some of these, like Prada example, would have multi-millions of followers. We've got even people like the Beckhams or whatever they might be. They've got hundreds of millions of followers. Mr. Beast, it's getting out of hand. It's getting out of hand.
It's but I think kind of zooming out in a way, architecture is also not always, but in recent history struggled, especially I think in the United States, with it not being understood by the general public and therefore not being valued. And which even before those two things comes the fact of people not being exposed to it enough. Obviously we have a handful of magazines, but exposed to it through the final photographs, but also the process, all the stuff that you've been talking about. And I think that's like a real serious barrier and limitation for the profession, because all of us believe in the mission, in the cause of what we do, right? But we can't really fulfill that if other people, clients and the general public, don't see value in what we do and don't understand what we do. So there's been more and more conversation since social media and Netflix of like, well, maybe there's ways to put out more content that will do many things, but one of them aid in addressing that issue. And there's been talks about documentaries and Netflix things and whatever else, but like social media is one of those avenues that could be very, very powerful. And if you look at the numbers, like you're saying, it's like, well, here's an industry and profession that is creative. It has cool looking stuff, which I think is important and brings value, but it's just we're not tapping into that line.
Well, and I think also a lot of the firms that use social media are probably at a level that most people cannot afford. Right?
Yeah.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Where if you really want to get through the general public, which is the masses, you need to be at that level, right? And there is a lot of like good architects who are not the most expensive or work on the most expensive project that could offer architecture services, and not just crappy drafting or like poor interior design stuff, but actually like quality work.
Or fragments of it
or
something.
Fragments of it, just to explain what it is that an architect does, because that's, a question, it's like your question, going back to your question, what is architecture? The second one to that is like, what does an architect do? Most people have no idea. Like they don't really have an understanding of that. And that is the big, that is the big issue, I think.
And what you mentioned there, David, there's a real contrast as well, because although it's very difficult for us to communicate the value of the architects and what we do, we're also dealing with something that is highly visual. A building influences people in every way possible. It impacts every single person on this planet in the way that it's either their home or their office or their whatever it might be. It impacts people in every way. And the visual nature and the experiential nature of architecture is fully accessible. It's accessible to everyone. Everyone can see it, everyone can feel it, everyone can experience it. And so it's really interesting that for something that is so visual and that is so visually engaging to the general public, you don't necessarily need to put together a really beautiful building. If you package it up well and communicate it well on social media, the general public will have a level of interest. Even if they don't understand about the architects or they don't understand about how it was designed or built, they'll still see it and be like, oh, that building looks nice, or whatever it might be. And so it is, as a industry, it is highly accessible. And it can be used by anyone and experienced by anyone. But for some reason, on the other end of it, as architects, we struggle to communicate what it is that we want to communicate. And so there's this real opportunity of the general public having an interest in architecture and just generally understanding the side of just how buildings are and how they work and how they impact people. And then you've got architects at the other end who are struggling to be able to communicate it. And so I find that sometimes it's about simplifying it and just putting it actually down to the bare bones, as we spoke about here, the process, just how you would build something. If you had an individual who was trying to build their practice, if they stood in front of a construction site and talked through the process of how it was actually being built and certain elements of design that are going to actually be going up, for example, they're putting a column in. This column is designed to do this and this. The general public can understand that and be interested in that. And then it gives them exposure and it shows their expertise and understanding and also proof in the pudding that they're actually building something. And so even that simple, that's such simplicity, that's such kind of simple process of displaying that through social media. And I think someone who is doing it really well is Initiate Architecture. So someone called Ross Hartland, which is, I think he's based in Wales in the UK. And he's built a massive profile, I think 150K plus. And every year there's a thing called the AJ 100, which is the top 100 largest practices in the UK fundamentally. And there's also another one called the AJ 100, which is the most followed practices in the UK. And he's consistently been hitting the top 15 most followed practices in the UK for the past few years. And he's only a studio with 3 people. And so that's an example of how, and he's growing, by the way, he's growing really quickly, and he communicates his work really well and efficiently and beautiful through his drawings, through him being on site and whatever it might be. And he's an example of how you can do it, and how the reality is that if you do show that process that we've been talking about, you show that behind the scenes and a bit of personality where the general public can understand that and can resonate with that and can understand, oh, okay, so that's why the column's been built in that way, or oh, that's why they've put the slab in or the foundations first. Lame, like really simple stuff that the general public can understand. That type of content I think is really valuable, and that would help us as a profession. Although in some ways we see it as very simplistic and simple, but I think our problem in architecture is that sometimes we overcomplicate things, and we try to overcompensate our knowledge and understanding about architecture, but you forget that actually the general public don't actually understand what you're talking about when you're talking about complexity of design and the geometry is this. All they want to know is actually, okay, how is this built, and what is the process of you getting there?
Right. Yeah, I fully agree with that. The final question, because we're just past the hour, is what is your favorite building?
Wow. It's a big question. There's a few that I'm interested in. One recently, actually, that I've just actually started an architecture series called Archi-Study, where I'm actually analysing the buildings that inspire me. And the one that I actually did recently was Enric Morales' Barcelona archery range. And the reason why I say that one, and I don't actually think it's there anymore, I don't think it even exists. But when it was built, it's built out of concrete, and it's very articulate in the way that the floor plan has been designed, with geometries that overlap and overlay. And the drawings are absolutely beautiful. They look amazing. But there's a real kind of weight to the project because of the material that it's built in. But also there's a lot of delicacy in the details in the way that it's been designed, and it's really playful and creative. And even though it's so simple, it's literally just an archery range, but they really embody the design and the nature and the geometry of an archery and a bow, so a bow and arrow. And the way that they designed it, I think, is really beautiful and clean. So I probably do have other buildings that I prefer, but that's just the first one that's come to my head on the spot.
That's awesome. I love that. Thomas, thank you so much for making the time on a Thursday in this case. This was a really lovely conversation, and I'm sure it'll continue. And I think what you're doing is great and probably necessary for sure, actually. And hey, we applaud it. It's awesome. So thanks for being on the show.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. It's been a really great conversation. So yeah, thank you for having me.
Thank you, everybody, for listening to this week's episode. If you like what we're doing, then please support the show by leaving a review of it in the Apple Podcasts app. You can also find us on Spotify and YouTube. Follow us and, leave comments and whatever on Instagram. That's our place that we are mainly active. The handle is Second Studio Pod. You can also text or call our hotline, which is 213-222-6950. It goes straight to voicemail, I believe. And then a text message is a text message. It goes to my phone. And what else is there? We have a website, which is secondstudiopod.com. And that's about it. So thanks for listening and talk soon. Bye.